Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And one of my favorite things to do is introduce you to really fantastic friends, speakers, people that we meet that can influence the way that you think. And today, I have the privilege and the pleasure of introducing you to Jake Thompson. So, Jake, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Steve. Excited to be here today.
So you and I were talking earlier, and your career to where you're at today to how you started is quite the story. But before we go there, what are we talking about today? What would you like to talk about?
Yeah, we're going to talk about what people's starting lineups in life look like. Who are their teammates? Why those teammates are so important to our professional and our personal success. And as you guys talk about a lot, developing that great life.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So before we go there, I want people to hear your story because, you're like me, a recovering CrossFitter, and your business started in a very modest way. One of the guys I'm mentoring was complaining that he's not in the upper 1%. And I said, no, you're unfortunately like us with the other 99% with the rest of us. So how did your career start? Like you just didn't pop out of a CrossFit gym. Talk to me about how the great life adventure for Jake started.
Yeah. So I grew up thinking I was going to be Jerry Maguire. I was going to be a sports agent. That was what I wanted to do. Went to college, grad school to get my MBA, started working in that industry a couple of years and realized this is not what I want to do and got out. It was end of 2008. We remember what the economy was like. I was struggling to get any kind of job opportunity based on non-traditional work experience with the Dallas Cowboys, the Dallas Desperados, the Arena League team, a bunch of the sports teams locally, as well as the agency. Didn't fit in that box that everybody wanted from a corporate job. And I needed to make bills. I had to pay rent. So I started freelancing, just graphic design, basic web design. Social media was so new, and just talking to companies, say, hey, let me help you with this. Everybody's figuring it out. Let's see how we can do it. Did that for a few years, but wasn't building a great life. I was, as you say, chasing a lot, adding a lot of hours, making a lot of money, incredibly unfulfilled and wasn't enjoying it. And so I started looking for opportunities to build, as I call it, something better than a sandcastle, because I felt like my work to that point had been a sandcastle that was solely for me, my toys, my money, but it wasn't helping actually make a difference whatsoever in anybody else's life. And I started exploring this idea of what would it look like for somebody if they woke up and stopped going through the motions and started being intentional, looking for ways to get better than the day before. Around that same time, I started CrossFitting in 2010. And I loved the idea of racing every day against myself, racing against the clock, that there were other people in there pushing me, but really it was me versus me. And I started embracing this idea of competing every day. And I've been a competitive kid all my life. I was a smaller kid growing up playing sports. And so competition's the only way you get on the field. And I started reframing that. And everybody I talked to, you could just see it resonate very differently with different people. This person was competing to be better professionally. This person wanted to show up better as a parent that they didn't have. And so after a while, I was like, there might be something here. Tried a few things, didn't work, and eventually settled on t-shirts and started selling them out of the trunk of my car behind the CrossFit gym as a side hustle. My friends laughed that it was like the apparel drug dealer. Like you'd go back after class, pop the trunk, what's new? And it just started to take off. And over the years, started doing that until a few key interactions twisted and changed my direction to the work I'm doing now, very unexpectedly as a speaker and coach. But we started slinging teas out of the trunk of a car, and then pretty soon traveling all over the country, working at expos, trying to tell anybody and everybody that, hey, I've discovered if you really want to reach your full potential and figure out what you're made of, the only way to do that is to compete every day with yourself.
So you mentioned teammates. And so talk to me about how the teammates in your mind determines trajectory. Like, how did you come up with this concept? How did it impact you?
Yeah. So in my book, I did a chapter on your starting lineup. And really that was inspired. If you think basketball, you got a starting lineup of 5. And it was inspired by the old Jim Rohn quote of, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. and thinking about the importance of who we hang out with. Because as kids, we just hang out with whoever's on the playground, whoever has the football, the video game, the toy. But as we get older, we have more opportunities to be intentional with who we hang out with. We just tend not to take advantage of it. We tend to just hang out on who we're around versus joining your organization, versus being selective with the people we go to for counsel or advice. And I really wanted to paint this picture of our teammates ultimately determine where we go in life. There's a Harvard professor, researcher named Dr. David McClellan, and he estimates that 95% of our successes and failures in life are attributed to the people we habitually associate with. 95% of our wins and losses can be tracked to the people we habitually associate with. And when I tell people that, they're like, wait a minute, what? And they have to evaluate your friends. Are they people that challenge you, encourage you, make you better? Or are they people that kind of let you complain, let you skate by, let you get away with something you probably shouldn't have, and don't really call you out on it? And I think that's where the majority of our relationships are, is because we've failed to realize the intentionality and the importance of them. And so when I wrote the chapter, I really wanted to say, hey, here's 3 people to avoid, here's 3 people to find. And ever since that book came out, doing more and more research on that, more and more conversations, the revelation of how much more important those close circles are, and developing a few of them, having a counsel you come to for work professionally. How can I get better dealing with this? But at the same time, doing it personally. If your marriage is struggling, your single buddy is probably not the one that's going to give you the best advice on how to fight for it. So who are you hanging out with of other married couples who have that strong, healthy relationship to lean into? If you're struggling owning a business, you don't go to your buddies and friends who have never owned a business, because they can't relate to some of those challenges. And so making sure not only are you in those right circles, but you're having coaches, mentors, you're keeping that circle of influence, because it will determine if you go up, how quickly you go up, or if you start to do the slow fade down into average, which is what we see most often.
Could you just give me a few minutes before we call it a day on one topic? It's a topic near and dear to my heart. And one of the things I try and talk to lawyers about is resilience, the ability to gut out some difficult time, because for lawyers, if they do trial work, family law work, any form of litigation work, they're with families or with cases that will consume every moment, and sometimes unconscious moments. They'll wake up thinking about it 2:00 in the morning. They'll have nightmares about their cases. If they're going to one of my clients who does med mal work, just did a 2-week trial, and the oxygen, the energy that it takes to do that. And sometimes they lose. Sometimes it's a bad case. It doesn't come out. Sometimes the jury rules against you. The judge rules against you. You just didn't see it coming. And you feel like, I'm out, man. I can't do this anymore. And the depression, the burnout in our profession is extraordinarily high. The suicide rate among lawyers above the age of 50 is astronomically high in comparison to the rest of the population. And you've done a lot of thinking around grit and just gutting it out. So talk to me for a few minutes about that. What's your thinking on this?
Yeah. So I look at grit as the ability to play the long game, and I look at resilience as our ability to bounce back, almost like a rubber band. How do we bounce back after defeat? And I think there's a couple of key pieces to it that make us more effective. Me having gone through storms with our companies, when I shifted our business from focusing solely on apparel to saying there's a better way to help people succeed and get results and go into this speaking route, we took a nosedive. And I was in the hole of, was this the right decision? And what did I do? Mentally, emotionally, marriage, we were having issues at the same time. So it was just a hot mess of a time. And I really went back to a couple of things. One, my circle. And this is where having that right teammates is so incredibly important, because they're the ones who during these times are going to encourage you, but also remind you, you got to take a step today. And they're going to hold you to that I would say, movement forward in the moment. The second thing that I've really learned is it's like paying off a debt, losing weight. You're never going to do it overnight. And for a lot of us in these moments of frustration, we find ourselves in a pit and we want to scale it that day. We want to go back to where we were the day before. And what we have to say is, what's the one step I can take today? And getting into this mentality every day, waking up and saying, okay, I have $100,000 worth of debt. I can't pay it all. Where can I be smart with my money and maybe pay $50 toward it, $100 toward it? Where I can't lose 100 pounds tonight, but where can I make sure I move for 20 minutes and be better about what I eat? And what you do is you take your focus off of everything, which is where I think a lot of us lose our resilience, is we're focused on everything all at once instead of what's immediately in our control right here in this moment, and say, what is the one action step I can take today that's going to improve it? And start to play that every single day, digging out. And that's not the easiest, which is why having that circle of influence is so incredibly important about who's around you. But additionally, reminding yourself of that. The third piece, I think, that is probably the most important, that maybe goes before going into any of this, is from a resilience standpoint, especially when it comes to our work, of really getting clear on our identity and who we are, and understanding it's not what we do. And I think that's a really important one, because when we pour our heart and soul into something and we lose, and our identity is wrapped up in what we do, we become very quickly fallen into the trap of, I'm a failure, I suck, I'm miserable, I'm never good at this, instead of understanding that what I did didn't work. And that takes an ability to be able to reflect and say, okay, on this trial, I did everything I believe in my power to win. We didn't win. I can say, hey, I'm a failure. I suck. I'm awful at this. I should quit. Or I can look at it and say, what I did in this time didn't work. If I were to step back and evaluate, what did I do well during this trial? Where is there room for improvement, and how am I going to improve it? It's 3 questions: well, better, how. And when your identity is not wrapped up in what you do and you understand who you are, you can ask and reflect on those questions of, what did I do well? Where do I need to do better? How do I do better? And implement it today. You have that with a supporting circle of people around you who remind you you are not what you do, as well as your ability to take action today. And then you really, really tighten in that focus of, instead of staring at the mountain, say, what's the next step, and climb that. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the future. I've got a fun story of my own experience of getting into an overwhelmed spot where you want to quit, and how we started to climb out of it. But those are the 3 that I think are really important and increase our ability to bounce back. I think most of us fail to develop the resilience because we just try to do too much too quick, and we think we can change it overnight, or we get stuck staring at what was and forget our ability to change things in the present. So I always go back to it. There's a really good book by a guy named Eric Greitens, called Resilience. And essentially they were both Navy SEALs, and it's a composition of letters he wrote to another former SEAL who was struggling with depression, suicidal thoughts, marriage breakup. And he just talks about resilience is like any muscle. We have to build it over time. Of, you're disappointed, how do you respond? Something really bad happens, how do you respond? And there's more ability in our human spirit than we give ourselves credit for a lot of times to respond. But we need to have our focus on the right place. We need to understand who we are is not what we do. And we need to have the right people around us, which goes back to our very beginning of those teammates determined trajectory of, if you're not surrounding yourself with the right community or the right people in your personal life as well, you're going to have a harder time rebounding in those tough times.